You're listening to Nurture Your Zest. I'm your host, Ashleigh King, and I will introduce you to a wealth of interesting, fascinating individuals from all walks of life who will share their stories, how they've overcome challenges, and you will find out their top tips for success. Through this podcast, you can gain tips to grow and change your life and the way you see the world, and help you to nurture your zest. Hello everyone. Today I'm delighted to be joined by Ryan Tahmassebi. Would you like to tell us more about yourself, Ryan?
Oh, yes. It's probably going to be the hardest question I have to answer today. I think I'm 33-year-old occupational psychologist by background. Live here, was born and raised here in Newcastle in the northeast, where I live with my partner and two young boys. So yeah, absolutely love the Northeast, and work as an occupational psychologist in the areas of organisational culture and employee engagement and all that weird and wonderful stuff.
Which is good for my next point, because I wanted to ask you, your title is Director of People Sciences, is that correct?
Yeah, absolutely. It's just this idea of how can we create better days at work for people? So how can we really understand what motivates people at work, what helps people to enjoy the work that they do, and how can organisations create work environments where people want to show up rather than feeling like they need to show up. And the people science element of that covers kind of how to understand that human behavior, a little bit of the neuroscience in there, but the occupational psychology around, what drives people to feel their best at work and therefore perform their best. And the sciences bit is really about using data to drive that. So really understanding how to get insights from people as to what matters to them at work, how they're currently perceiving work, and helping businesses use that data to drive the business decisions that they're making.
That sounds really interesting, especially given that there is so much data in the world now, and thinking about the future and the future of work. Actually, how are you finding that the data is helping you to be better bosses or helping to plan and predict what organizations and workforces need?
Yeah, absolutely. That in an ideal world, yes. I think organisations need to be better at how they use their people data, and to really understand how the employee experience actually drives things like customer experience and profitability and labour turnover and sickness absence and things like that. Whereas I think typically organisations have done really kind of high level, like engagement type surveys with their workforce, but not really objectively looked at the data or really got to the heart of day-to-day experience to understand how people feel, and to understand that how people feel is going to differ based on where they are in their employee life cycle, where they are in their personal life. All of these different variables are going to impact that. So it's actually about getting organisations to understand the role that data can play in terms of their culture and in terms of their day-to-day business decision-making, and how data can almost form like the backbone of their business strategy, but really making sure that they're really open to actually hearing how people truly feel about the business,
It's a good point, because often, like you mentioned, the employee engagement survey, this type of thing, it's used, and a lot of staff spend a lot of time filling in long surveys, and there's probably a prize draw to complete it and that kind of thing. But a lot of it is qualitative data, so it's all writing and words. And how do you measure that? How can you turn that into something that is useful for the organization? And I just wonder what your experience of that is in measuring the real trends and dealing with them.
Yeah, I mean, the qualitative stuff is where the real richness is in the data, really. That's where you really get to the kind of the heart and soul of your employees and understanding how they're experiencing work. But organizations really need to try and find ways to keep their employees thinking about solutions and thinking about improvements and thinking about the future, and kind of keeping it constructive, kind of adult to adult, rather than kind of employees seeing that 1 point a year as being the time to kind of vent on every little thing that's kind of miffed them and caused any kind of frustration over the previous year or 6 months or whatever it is. So there's a lot of opportunity in terms of using those insights and really doing like the thematic analysis and really understanding this is what the numbers are kind of saying in terms of what's driving engagement, what's kind of driving our people to either stay here happily or to ultimately leave the organization. But then really using that kind of free text and the qualitative to really get to the heart of it and really understand and get, like I say, add that kind of richness to it. So the data tells you one thing, but it's almost like the storytelling can often come from what's in the words. But again, this all comes down to how authentic organizations are and how much they really want to hear that feedback. And often I think businesses struggle to remember that, right or wrong, what people say is how they're feeling. That's their perception at the time. And often organizations will jump to, oh, I know who said that, and it's because of da da da. Oh, yeah, they're saying that, but they don't understand the X, Y, and Z. And often it's not about excusing away or trying to find a reason why people feel that way. It's just about understanding that that's how they feel. And it's really, really useful insight for an organization to understand how they feel. And I guess for me, if I was to break it down and make it really simple, what I would absolutely love is for organizations to value employee feedback and their employee experience as much as they do customer feedback. But obviously, the customer is often seen as the point of revenue, whereas an employee is often seen as a kind of that's an overhead, that's a cost for running, and they're seen as a resource to deliver something for the customer. So the customer is given far more kind of importance to what they're saying and what they're feeling. But a customer will only ever know the product. The customer will never know the day-to-day, the right to the heart of the business like the employee does. So we really need to listen to them and understand from them how we can make the kind of improvements that are, yes, going to make them happier and healthier. But it's not just about the happiness and the healthiness of them. That is ultimately going to help the business as well. It's going to help the world have better businesses that are doing better work. And that can only be good for everybody, really.
Wow, it's a point I'm really curious about, actually, because you spoke there about people as resources, and there is such a big shift in the HR industry and just within HR at the moment around people sciences, people managers, director of, there's a new phrasing and language almost emerging. Have you noticed that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we're definitely starting to see more human resource teams become more about people and culture, and it is just that kind of language point. But to be honest, I'm also seeing the same with the term employee engagement. So employee engagement is something which we've almost, the way in which we've spoken about it, the way in which we've managed it, it's become about understanding that an engaged employee is more productive. So how, are you going the extra mile? Are you motivated to do more than what's required of you? Engagement has become about how can we make a person happier to do more or more willing to do more, rather than understanding that if you create a really great working culture and a really great environment, engagement will happen. If you go and if you to a restaurant, you would be shocked if your hostess or your waiter, your waitress came up to you and asked you how much of a tip you were going to leave them before you'd even had the meal. Never mind if they asked you it straight after. You just don't do it. But what you understand in that kind of environment is if that you provide a really great service and you deliver a really good experience for the customer, that they're probably going to leave something in terms of a gratuity, and that's kind of the social norm. So why, when it comes to something like engagement, do we just want to jump straight to asking people, are you engaged? And if not, why? Why don't we just kind of really get people's an understanding of what motivates people and what makes people happy at work? What do they enjoy doing? More of a focus on strengths, thinking about everything that encompasses the day-to-day working environment, diversity and inclusion, health and well-being, your work relationships, the physical environment, the types of technology you're using. It's about so much as it is about those traditional things you mentioned. You touch upon managers and having more people managers and things like that. Your experience of work and your perception of work is influenced by so many things. And we need to make sure we give people an opportunity to talk about that. And I think, coming back to your initial point about HR, I think HR are wanting to become more kind of proactive kind of partners for people right across the business to help give them that voice. And then the key part for them is to then become more skilled at telling that story back inside the organization. Businesses are fantastic at externally promoting their brand and how good they are to work for and how good they are as a business. They're definitely not as good at doing it internally in terms of that internal communication around who they are, what they're about, what they stand for, what their culture's like. And I think HR are really now, yes, through people sciences, but also through some other areas as well, they are starting to try and make that move and that switch. And even some of those language points, like moving from HR to people and culture, can actually have a bit of a big impact.
Yes, thank you for sharing that. So it's great to talk about HR and some of the key trends and issues coming up, but I definitely want to know more about you, because that's why I've invited you here today. So can you tell us, you spoke about authenticity. For you, what does it mean to be an authentic leader?
For me, it's really about emotional intelligence for me, but it's also about, if I think about with my work, particularly the type of work I do, I've seen and I've heard lots of stories about, going into organizations and kind of telling them a really positive story or spinning a positive story on what a survey might be saying or what you're hearing from inside their organization. I try to be authentic by speaking about what I passionately believe, and whilst I know that there'll be many, many, many times that I'm wrong, I'm open to hearing that, absolutely. But also, I just really believe that you need to tell people what they need to hear and not what they want to hear. We see examples of this in politics and in healthcare and in the media all the time, where we hear stories that are being told based on a statistical piece of information, but it's not necessarily the whole picture. It's, telling a narrative, a predefined narrative that you want to tell. So for me, authenticity is about really genuinely wanting to get to the heart of a problem. And for me, something like the way in which we think about what work means and what it should mean and what it should feel like. For me, that's about really being open to the fact that we've been getting it wrong for a large amount of time, and that we simply have to be better at it. And actually, for me, authenticity is about kind of holding your hands up and admitting that that is the case, and that there are lots you can improve. But the worst thing to do is to just kind of keep kind of kicking that can down the road, or not being open to doing that. And when it comes to things like changing the future of work, we need to start with education and changing kind of expectations of our children as to what work should feel like from that point, because otherwise it won't change. We'll continue making people think it's all about the grades, and you go into a grad scheme and you just, no matter how many hours or whatever they ask for you, you've got to do it, because if you don't do it, someone else will. We really have to look upstream and think of that. This is a societal problem when it comes to work and how we think about work. So we need to kind of get to the root of the problem rather than just kind of doing the whole sticky plaster here and there. So for me, authenticity is about not always looking at the easy answer. It's being open and willing to learn, but really kind of talking passionately about what you really believe in, not just what you think other people might want you to say and hear. And the last part of it is that, I wear my heart on my sleeve, which, to be honest, I'm not always sure is the right thing. Sometimes I believe it is the right thing. Sometimes I maybe I overshare. But for me, I've got a lot of how I am on a day-to-day basis is largely driven by what's happening in my personal life and how I'm feeling from a personal point of view. And I'm always very open in terms of sharing what I'm going through, what I'm feeling and thinking about things, and expressing my emotions as well. But I quite like that in a leader. I quite like that in a person, because you can't just switch off everything else. And actually, if you've just got a stone face on, you've got the same expression all the time, like a work persona, I think people see through that, and then you don't come across as a genuine person, So I would say they're probably the main things.
Thank you. It's so interesting to hear what you've said there, especially about wearing your heart on your sleeve. It's an attribute of mine also, and I also am not sure sometimes if it's the right thing to do, but I think through being authentic and being yourself, you allow other people to be themselves also. I did want to ask you, so you are here particularly today. I want to ask you about International Men's Day.
Yeah.
And the reason being that I really wanted to speak with you about this is I know that you are very pro equality, diversity and inclusion. And I'd like to know, for you, what does International Men's Day mean to you?
For me, it my answer is probably going to be influenced by my own experiences that actually, we have had a long way to come in terms of thinking about creating more diverse workplaces and, bridging the gender pay gap and all of those things that we're doing and helping to create more inclusive working cultures, absolutely. But actually, whilst men perhaps have had the rub of the green to it and they've been largely favoured, typically in terms of traditional views of work, my own personal experiences have really led me, and work experiences led me to think more around the mental health side of things, particularly in terms of again, this traditional view of the male that they, just kind of get on with things, and, that they don't perhaps suffer from stress, or they don't wear their heart on their sleeve or express their emotions. And, if I admit to feeling stressed at work, or if I admit to being depressed or something like that, that's going to hold me back in terms of my career. And I think for me, a lot of what I've done over the past few years is to really try and talk openly about my own experiences, so that people can see, well, actually, you can go through a lot of these personal struggles and still have a successful career, or just do work that you enjoy. That depends what your definitions of success are. I do a job that when my alarm goes off in the morning, like, I don't mind getting up and going into work, because I quite enjoy the people I work with and the work that I do. So for me, that's a successful career for me. I've found something that I enjoy doing, and I've been able to kind of progress and help the other people that I work with. But that's not been without its struggles. And for me, it's really important to kind of talk openly about that, so other people who might have those fears, who might have those views, who might be affected by the stigma around something like mental health, if they feel more comfortable about opening up and talking about it because they hear someone else talking about it, then for me, that's why days like this are really important. It's really important to hear from other people and kind of break down some of those barriers so that others feel more comfortable to talk.
Thank you. And from your experience, or from the people you may have worked with, or your experience trying to help with stress in the workplace and things like this, what type of issues might be typical for men that they would struggle with?
Well, that's a really good question. I think you see a lot of like workplace pressures. It's not just a case of everything being outside of work, and I think it is this holistic view of people that is actually needed. That the whole person approach of you are who you are inside, outside of work, and outside of work. So I always think that there are pressures which come in from all these different walks of life, and often it's all about how those things often come together. The perfect storm type scenario, or just at what point does it all or elements of it start to exceed your capacity to cope, and the level of resilience that you might have to deal with day-to-day pressures. Every single person's got pressure on a day-to-day. For the majority of the time, it might feel like good, positive, motivating pressure, but there are times when it starts to feel like it overwhelms. So I think that there are lots of different things at work that can get to people, like workload, or lack of poor work-life balance, uncertainty around job security and things like that, particularly in today's world. And the relationship you have with your line manager is often a big one that we see that can cause a lot of people to feel quite under pressure and leading to stress at work. But then there's lots of stuff outside of work as well. Again, you'll have a lot of males, traditional males, who are seen as being the kind of the provider, the breadwinner of the household, and go out and go to work and then go home and make sure everything's kind of going great at home, and actually any kind of small changes or turbulence in either areas can impact the other, and then it can kind of build from there. So I think we just need to make it feel like a more accessible conversation, a more comfortable conversation for people to have about how they're feeling, again, on a day-to-day basis. And in an ideal world, how can we make those conversations just business as usual between peers and with a manager, and it not always being about going to occupational health or seeking out a kind of a mind charity or relate. They're all great when someone's got to a certain point. But again, we're talking about looking upstream and getting to a point where we really tackle an issue so that we actually have people really proactively thinking about their health and well-being and managing it in a really proactive way, rather than always talking about, well, what do we do when people feel stressed? Let's prevent people from getting there in the first place.
That's very important, and really useful to hear those lessons as well, and the types of struggles that some men may face. I'm also curious how you, as a business leader, lead by example, and I wonder, do you do particular things in your workplace to try and show people how to deal with stress, particularly the men in your team or in your workplace?
Absolutely, we talk about it really openly. We've got a number of examples where males within the team have shared really openly on our kind of Slack company channel to the whole business about some struggles that they're going through at the moment. And every single person in the business has rallied around that individual. And we've had it with females as well. I've opened up about my own challenges. I've spoken at a number of events about mental health and my own personal struggles with depression in the past. And I think that's all I can do. All I can do is be as aware as I can possibly be of how people within my team and within the business are feeling, and be there to support them and encourage them to talk and reach out to me, as well as being just as willing to do that. I don't see it as I'm a member of a leadership team, so I'm not going to talk about my emotions, because that wouldn't be the right thing to do. We lead by example, by being the change you want to see. So I'll often really make sure that I have conversations with people about how they're feeling, about how I'm feeling. But we've done things as well around mental health first aid, just making sure that people across the business learn more, hear more. We've brought people externally to come in and talk about things like diversity and inclusion in the workplace, mental health. So we're always making sure that we support people and really create an environment where they know that no one's going to judge them if they say, "Do you know what, I'm not 100% today. In fact, I'm not even 70% today." We've got a really great environment, and for us now, it's about how we make sure that we never lose that as we grow. So we've grown to 40 people now, and it's going to be another 20, 25 potentially coming over the next 12 months. And there are some central core things which we would never want to lose, and that human kind of, we're all there, we've all got each other's back, we're all happy to have a conversation with one another about anything, is the kind of core of our culture that we will never lose.
It's a beautiful culture to have. I love it, and I think it's wonderful to be aware of that as something you want to keep as you scale and grow, because many organisations do face that challenge as they get bigger. Some things have to go, so I'm really glad to hear that you're prioritising that as a leadership team. We spoke about leading by example, and I know that you're a dad and you're a young dad. So what does that mean for you? You've got two young boys, raising them to be, the men of tomorrow, the next generation. How do you think the world might look differently when they were big?
Oh, how do I think it might look, or how I hope it would look, would be two different questions. I think. Thanks for saying a young dad as well. I appreciate that. Don't feel it at times, but yeah. Do you know, I've been. I separated from them when they were 1 and 2 years old, and my first thought was probably quite in line with what you might expect of a dad at that age, or maybe at any age. I don't know. My first thoughts were, wow, this is overwhelming, because you go from just coming in from work and spending like an hour doing some fun stuff, maybe bathing your kids, reading them a story, to doing everything. Cooking for them every day, cleaning, preparing everything for them, washing their clothes, making sure you get them to school on time, get them from school on time. It's like the stereotypical mum role becomes what you have to do. But actually, I believe that I've got a bond with those two boys that I wouldn't have had otherwise, because it's just that kind of closeness, that special connection that I've had with them from that. And it's really difficult at first, but it's for me as well, that richness of experience, to actually think to myself, wow, if I'd stayed in a relationship that I was in, I maybe would never have had this. And I just didn't know how amazing it would be until I was thrown into it. And for me, I would just always hope that, they grow up in a world where it's really encouraged for fathers to spend more quality time with their children. And, we're seeing more around paternity leave, and some organisations are even offering kind of paternity leave, the kind of the same length as maternity leave. But again, it's not just something you can do for a couple of weeks or a couple of months. We really need to support working dads to be able to spend more time with their family, not just their children. So I like to see my boys seeing me around my partner Amy as well, because they see the love between us, and I want them to grow up seeing that that's what a lovely family life should look like, and they get the same from their mum's side. So I want them to grow up kind of seeing what it looks like to be in something that's kind of happy and healthy and loving, but also to know that the time that I spend with them is something which is just so special, that when they grow up, they kind of always feel like they want to be really close with their family, and never lose that, because I think that's something that's so important to me. I never really had any family outside of my parents and my brother, in terms of like a closeness. And so it's a kind of the way in which I lean on them is I know how important that is to me. So I want the boys to kind of know and grow up knowing that they've got that kind of communication. They can speak to anyone. Someone's always there for them. but also that they see the kind of the right behaviours coming from their parents as well, I think is absolutely really important. And of course, I'll always talk to them about this idea that if you're not happy with what you're doing, change it. And your first worry shouldn't be about money, it shouldn't be about anything else. It should be about what you've just said. You've just said you're not happy, so you've got to change it.
It's a really important thing to teach your children, actually, because what you're saying there is, you know, it would be so easy to stay in a relationship as well where you feel like you should be there, but actually you might be modeling the wrong behaviors and you may not be happy or things like this. So actually showing love and showing, you know, that sometimes things don't work out in life, but you're still there for them, you're still, you know, with them, and really prioritizing them in that way, it speaks a lot volumes actually on your personal character and your authenticity, which I know is very important to you.
Oh, and don't get me wrong, Ashleigh. I mean, I've made more mistakes than the next person, and lots of things to kind of look back on and think, well, I should have done that differently. Because, you know, you're right. What you've just said, you've hit the nail on the head. Is that, you know, the boys need to see me happy. And, you know, and that's what's best for them. But often in the past, I have thought too much about, you know, them and kind of protecting them, and or how are they going to feel about something. And, you know, it needs to be more about, you know, they need to see the best version of me for them to become the best version of themselves. And the same goes for their mother as well. And, you know, that's something that I kind of owe it to them, really. And it's, you know, it's something that I need to kind of think about more and do even more to kind of role model the right kind of behaviours to them. Absolutely. So, you know, I also have this kind of idea that, you know, your past can't define you, and it's all about, you know, the future and putting your best foot forward in the future and being the best person that you can be. So again, that's something that I'm trying to kind of bring into work as well. Just always kind of thinking about, right, you know, organisations often look at the past, oh, this went wrong in the past, that went wrong in the past, or, you know, oh, but if we do that, you know, we can't have this happen again, and things like that. And it's often like kind of an approach where you're always looking at to just fixing a problem, and, you know, this kind of deficit-based approach where actually I'm trying to kind of approach things of like, what's the dream in the future, what's the dream scenario, and how can you make that happen based on, you know, who you are, the strengths you have in your team, if we're talking about the work environment. And don't always be held back by the past and what's happened in the past, because it doesn't really help you get anywhere, or it certainly doesn't help you get as far as you can if you focus more on the strengths in the future and, you know, what can be rather than what has been.
Absolutely. I did want to ask, particularly because we're talking about International Men's Day and mental health, and sometimes men do feel stuck and things can go wrong. And I wanted to ask, when things weren't working out for you and you decided to end that relationship, my question was, I think that sometimes there can be a lot of guilt and stigma and shame around things ending. And my question for you there was, how do you motivate yourself if you're going through a time like that? Because I think that might be inspiring to others listening on kind of picking yourself up where something isn't quite going right, and you need to not necessarily with a relationship, but you may need to change direction in your work life, or maybe you want to study, or something isn't quite right. How do you find that within yourself to be honest with yourself and reconsider options and then motivate yourself to get there?
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good question. Do you know what? I've always thought that there is some kind of almost like central, like non-negotiable things inside of you, and like almost like your innate kind of beliefs and qualities and things that make you naturally kind of resilient that you have to kind of lean on. So if I think back to when that happened, and it wasn't so much a, you know, we moved back. We'd been living in Manchester for a few years, and we've moved back to Washington and bought a house in Washington with the belief that, you know, we were going to try and make something work that really deep down we both knew wasn't going to work. And it was actually not that long, maybe 12 days after that, you know, the boys' mum kind of moved out with the boys, and my instant kind of mindset was nothing about the relationship. It was more about what the boys would think. So again, it was always kind of, what will they think of me? You know, what's my relationship going to be like with them? And that kind of led to me kind of catastrophizing and thinking that, you know, I wasn't going to see them, they were going to grow up and think I didn't love them, or all of this kind of stuff that goes through your head when you high emotions, you start thinking irrationally. and as well as some health issues I had at the time, some really bad health issues I had at the time, and some kind of struggles with work. I'd then moved back to Newcastle. I wasn't around my colleagues as much, so there was the pressure and the feelings of isolation. That perfect storm, which I referred to earlier, kind of happened for me. And there was a kind of a really clear time when I was in away for work in London, and I did kind of consider kind of ending everything. But actually what kind of stayed with me, and I focused on what was, again, the two boys and that and family as well, and thinking about their feelings and what they needed me to be, as well as thinking about, just, like friends, like I mentioned, those family, and just kind of sticking and thinking about all the good things that I still had in my life, all the positives that you still have in your life. And you've just got to believe in yourself, I think, as well. So it's that kind of thinking that, I can fight back from this, and I can actually, get my life back on track. It can be better than it ever has been before. And I think that's something that when people are going through something, and if there are any listeners that are going through something, is that don't shut yourself away from it. Like, embrace it. Be okay with the fact that something's really getting you down at the moment, and talk to people about it. If there's not a friend or a family member that you feel you can talk to about it, there are resources and helplines out there that you can call, and there's always someone that's willing to listen. I would be even willing, to do that myself, and people can connect with me on social networks and things like that, because it is so important. And I spoke to people about it, as well as my friends and my family, and I used kind of going to the gym and health and fitness as a way of kind of keeping my body active, but also helping with my mind as well. So, but at that initial point, at the point where I felt the lowest, it was just about kind of like almost like not giving up on yourself and remembering all the good qualities about yourself. And I've had, even like in the last year, I've had a lot of moments where I've kind of not felt so great about myself as a person. And how I deal with that is I almost do that kind of just like that strengths focused work with myself of, but think about all your qualities, and think about all the good things that you've done for people. Think about all the good things you've done for your kids, your family, at work, and just kind of remind yourself of all the good qualities. And also thank other people and speak to other people for all of their good qualities as well, and all of that kind of stuff can give you a psychological boost. But I'd say the most important thing is when you start feeling like that, you need to not shut yourself away. It feels like the easiest thing to do, and it often feels like the right thing to do, but it's the worst thing that you can do. And it's just going to make you feel worse. It's going to isolate you even more, and it's going to leave you alone with your own thoughts and on a negative spiral with your own thoughts. And it's really, really not good.
Thank you. That's really special to hear, and to hear what you've shared, and really brave. I appreciate you talking about that experience and what you went through, and how others can also build some resilience around that particular topic. I've always thought if things become too much and people do want to hurt themselves or end it all, it's such a shame, because it's really a permanent solution for a temporary problem. And everything is, there is always a way out. There is always a way to work together to make to get some support and get what's needed. And what you were saying there about working away and being on your own, do you feel that sense of isolation is really a key thing in what affected your mood at the time? I
think so. The sense of isolation, definitely. I've never been good at being away from home, so just sometimes that can kind of exacerbate things as well in terms of how you're feeling, and just really kind of ramp up and dial up those kind of negative feelings that you might have. I think you're totally right in terms of the idea of kind of taking your own life is, it's the absolute kind of that's that permanent solution to a problem which you're experiencing, and some struggles that you're experiencing. What it highlights is just how severe kind of a negative frame of mind someone must be in, that they think that the not being here is going to ultimately be less painful than being here and fighting on. But even myself in relatively recent times have had those thoughts of trying into looking ahead and imagining a particular situation and thinking that you couldn't possibly bear that to be the reality, so you never want to be around or feel that is the reality of the situation. And they can often be things that are linked to relationships and family and work as well. If people are perhaps looking looking at things like job uncertainty and, in the current economical climate, and they have worries about things like a mortgage or making ends meet and things like that. There are so many different pressures coming from different parts of life. And we just have to do as much as we can to help people realise that there is a better way, and there's always going to be a better way than that permanent solution that you mentioned. And it is, for me, it's a very emotive word to kind of say, or even emotive to kind of even talk about it, because it's something which I've kind of thought about personally in the past, and it's something which I know is the biggest killer of young men. And the suicide rates worldwide is something like every 15-20 seconds or something, someone commits suicide across the world somewhere. So we've lost a number of people just in the time you and I have been having this conversation, and it's really painful to kind of think about it, because when you try and empathize and put yourself in the mindset of that person or those people, it feels really, really difficult to do. But they must be going through such untold pain and feel like there's no possible way out, that we need to do absolutely everything we can to make people feel like there's someone there that's able to help them. If that's just listening, great. If it's anything else, we need to find ways to be able to do it, because there is nothing more important than kind of keeping people alive and people living a happy and thriving life, really.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for sharing your real lived experience around this topic. I really appreciate it. I do want to ask, before we finish, what is your number one word that helps you to nurture your zest, and that's helped you to rebuild yourself and get over tough times?
I'm torn between two, but I guess they kind of link together. So one would be family, the other would be love. So they sound quite, kind of soft and fluffy and things like that. But no, I was not going to say football or the gym or any of those kind of maybe stereotypical male responses. No, for me, family and love and the boys. It's the innocence and the smiles and the laughter that you have when you're with the people that you truly love. That kind of can often give you everything you need. It could give you a bigger boost than anything you could buy, any other experience you could go out and have. So for me, whenever I've been through my most difficult times, it's always been looking to family who never judge, who always support, and then the boys who always kind of look at me as if I'm, wearing a superhero outfit, a Superman outfit, and they're the things which give me a lot of a boost. And particularly over the last a few months, kind of buying a house and moving in with my new partner and kind of almost starting a family again. Those things just give me all of the kind of the strength and the motivation and the optimism for the future, really. So again, I would come back to those things. Family, love are going to be the absolute key ones for me always.
Thank you very much for sharing. That's brilliant. And thanks for coming on the show today.
No problem. Thank you for having me. Really enjoyed it.
You've been listening to Nurture Your Zest. You can find us online on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram and LinkedIn at Nurture Your Zest. If you've liked today, please subscribe. You can also leave us a review if you're feeling extra kind. Today's podcast has been made available through the kind sponsorship of TL Multimedia and That Branding Company. We look forward to catching up with you again soon as you learn to nurture your zest.